this workshop. I'm going to also invite Lloyd to speak about certain aspects of this, and yeah, and so this session really covers the core sort of integral components of what an editor would look for in a publication. So obviously we've mentioned some of those things, including good English, language skills, and also for you to understand what a peer review process is. Often known as the blind reviewers. You never meet the blind reviewer in a submission, and I think that's also important to understand that process because it can take a long time to actually get published. When Sarah comes, she'll be speaking about argument, contribution to the field, and criticality, because that's really her field. But if Lloyd, if you want to speak specifically about the importance of English, writing style, peer review, if you have those, as an editor, and then we'll continue with it. Thank you.
Look, one of the major complaints that we get on the journal is that it just takes so long to get our articles reviewed. The problem is, I'm sure you appreciate what it's like. I mean, the problem is finding someone who's an expert in that particular field of research on the one hand, and then getting that person to promise to do a review, and then get the review and send it back to you guys. And then what happens in our case is that we have to find two people to do reviews. So what tends to happen in the British Journal of Middle Eastern Studies is that we more or less make an unspoken promise that if we don't hear back from the referees that we found within 3 months, we stop to nag them. Obviously, we can't nag them too forcefully because we don't want to alienate them, because it means we don't get the possibility of using them as referees ever again. So it is problematic. Having said that, I mean, the system works quite well. It's completely anonymous. I can guarantee there's absolutely no way the referee... Too fast. There's absolutely no way the referee... Sorry. There's absolutely no way the referee can understand where the article is coming from, or who the article is coming from. It's completely anonymous. Unless, of course, it's their PhD student. But, that doesn't happen. So it's completely above board. The system seems to work well. There are unfortunate cases where the review process takes about a year. But those kind of situations are very, very few and far between. It will be quite interesting to see if there's an average statistic in terms of the time that it takes, but it's something that maybe I should try to find out how many it is overall. So that's peer review. What else do you want me to talk about?
Yeah, so what do you look for in terms of the checklist? What is the checklist really? Yeah.
Basically, what we're looking for is a new contribution to existing knowledge. It's the same criteria that we use in the UK for a PhD. But of course, it's a completely different ballgame for just a single article of, let's say, maximum 20 pages. So there's not a great deal of originality that you can fit into those 20 pages. So we're really looking for something that is really just scratching the surface. It doesn't have to be really that original. It could be an argument which asks for, let's say, a new approach, a new methodology to study a certain topic. You could have new resources. So you don't actually have to give a specific answer to your research question. So your research question in itself could be the original part of your article. So there are many, many ways, if you like, to achieve this goal of doing something just a little bit original. It could be the research question, it could be the methodology, it could be your answer to your research question. There's no fixed definition about what makes something original. Okay? But certainly if you have that, that's fantastic. What we are also looking for in an article, aside from an aspect of originality, is evidence that you are familiar with the field. So in a way, what we're looking for is an adequate form of maybe a literature review. Okay? This doesn't have to be, you know, pages and pages long. You can cite the most important people in your footnotes, for example, in your references. But the literature review on its own is not enough. So you need to go beyond the literature review and say, yes, I'm familiar with this, but X doesn't say Y, X doesn't fit Z. So you need to say why you are writing the article and why your article is perhaps better than what's gone before, or what it contributes that hasn't been said before. Okay? That is not my specific job as the chief editor. That would be the job of the associate editors. Okay? Because the associate editors are the people who are more specifically related to the individual discipline of the topic that you're looking at. Okay? The other thing to do is that when you get your feedback from the anonymous referees, is that for my particular journal, you have the opportunity to give some feedback to their responses. Whatever you do, don't argue with them. Don't get in some kind of academic debate or controversy with them. Recognise that what they are doing is valid, that their points are well taken. If you disagree, there's nothing wrong if you disagree, but make sure that you do it in an academic fashion, obviously. Make sure you frame your arguments and say, well, yes, I could have mentioned X, but my article is really about Y. Okay? But in the majority of cases, the authors of the article do in fact recognise that the criticisms of the referees are valid, and thereby you have an opportunity to transform your article, to make corrections, and to resubmit it. So in most cases you get the option to either submit the article again completely, or you have minor corrections, or you have major corrections. But the first thing to do is to argue with the referees. Because if you argue with the referees and then you resubmit it, the chances are the referee will come back and completely reject it. So it's not worth taking the risk. Peer review?
Yeah.
Any questions?
I actually have a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a question about what's the border between measure correction and rejection of that paper. What are the criteria of an article to be, categorized as measure correction? To what extent writers are asked to work after the submission, work on that paper?
The usual situation is that if an article gets through the initial stage and is sent to associate editors and they send it out to referees, the vast majority of articles come back from the referees and they ask for major revisions. It's very, very rare that an article is completely rejected. Very rare. Because let's face it, articles are submitted by people who are academics, 90% of whom have PhDs. So they are intelligent people. Okay? Usually, they have an argument. They have a research question. So the articles that are not accepted and rejected, those are the articles which do not have a research question. So just more or less, a lot of the time we get articles which are submitted by, let's say, a master's student who hasn't reached that level of critical awareness. And I think that's the key, the idea of criticality, questioning your sources. That's in fact where the research questions come from. If you have your sources, whether they are manuscripts, whether they are political ideas, whether they are cultural values, if you question those and ask questions about them, that's where the criticality comes in. And that's where the really interesting, dialogues take place. So if the referees can see that degree of criticality, it's more likely that the article, if it's not accepted outright, it's more likely that there will be either minor revisions or major revisions. If an article doesn't have that criticality, if it just accepts Y says this, Z says that, then there's not much chance that the article will go further. But in terms of percentages, I think the vast majority of our articles go for major revisions. It's very, very rare that an article goes straight through with nothing at all. And I think that's probably because the reviewers have a kind of like a bit of pressure on them. Oh, I've got to say something critical because I'm a referee, you know? So maybe that's why there are very, very few articles go right through.
I'm referring to some very big problems in their methodology, for example, unfixable at that stage that the researcher should redo the whole methodology, the whole method production, for example. In this case,
in those kind of situations, then they would just be rejected. If there's a major problem with methodology, then it would be rejected.
Because it's a base for your...
Because without a methodology, the article will just crumble into sand. And if the methodology is really, really weak, and it demands too much work, I think it's perhaps unfair on the person who's reading the article to expect, you know, to do revisions, then possibly you can get accepted. We have to be cruel to be kind. So if the methodology is weak, it's a problem. If the methodology is weak, the research question is weak. So it's not worth progressing any further.
The question I have, and also from my own experience in trying to publish, is about, and this is something also with other members here, I think will have the same problem, is identifying where they can contribute. You know, how did they position themselves in relation to different communities of arguments and knowledge? Some journals are positioned from left to right? You know, some are right-wing, some are neoliberal, some are left, communist, even. You know, how do you position yourself? And I think, I mean, it's really important because I've had problems in doing this. You know, how do I position myself in relation to critical heritage studies? You know, there's heritage studies, but also there's critical heritage studies. And I think it's really important, I think.
It is an important question, but I think it's an important question in relation to the kind of projection that you see for your career, where you want to go. If you want to kowtow to a journal, you take their position, whether it's left-wing or right-wing or maybe anti-Marxist or postmodern or whatever. You adopt the kind of jargon that's used, okay? And you just make your choice. If you're someone who perhaps expresses a greater, let's say, the work of academic freedom and just writing for the love of the academy, then you need to investigate which journals are those which are perhaps reflecting your interests or your perspectives. You know, so it's a matter of critical choice. I mean, it just does depend on how you want to lead your life, how you want to be seen in the field. I mean, that's a major thing for some people, how they want to be perceived by their peers.
Do you think that most journals have quite a strict, stringent position regarding something, you know, post-colonial? I mean, obviously sometimes they are post-colonial, but do you think they're very, very aware and concerned about what kind of articles they publish? Even if it's a very good article, but for instance it's post-colonial studies, they wouldn't publish something on maybe promoting neoliberalism. I guess it goes back to some of the other issues we discussed.
It's an interesting question. If I can answer that with a specific example, in the British Journal of Middle Eastern Studies, we've had a series of articles in recent years which have come from Turkey, which reflects the interests and the perspectives of the ruling elite, and they are seen by the associate editors as being too partisan. And so they're rejected on that basis. Too partisan. So reflecting the party line. So you have to be, as authors, you have to be sufficiently critical to transcend that. It's not just Turkey. We've had a number of articles which have been submitted, and the associate editors have decided that these are what we might call policy papers. And we don't publish policy papers which reflect a certain interest to influence government. Okay, we're not interested in doing that kind of thing. We're more interested in specific academic analysis. Okay, so if you publish something which takes a very, very, let's say, partisan line, a political line, chances are, depending on the journal that you publish in, it might be rejected. On the other hand, I mean, you might discover there's a journal which perhaps endorses a particular partisan party line, in which case you might have a good chance of getting your journal accepted. I mean, that's a point to perhaps indicate that your background research, your choice of journals is absolutely vital, you know, depending on what you want to do. If you want to get your name around, if you want to have a reputation as someone who publishes these kind of articles, then of course go ahead and publish in these kind of journals. But for me, my personal opinion is that these kind of journals are fake journals. They're not really endorsing valid academic standards. But they exist. But those journals which do not adopt that party line will just, you know, reject those kind of articles out of hand with policy documents and articles which are perhaps in favour of one side over the other.
So is it difficult to distinguish between these kinds of articles and those? This is partisan, this is policy.
So for example, I'm not a specialist in Turkish history or Turkish policy or Turkish politics. That's why the decision is made by my associate editors. So my associate editors have incredible power. So don't think of me as like, you know, the big boss, the big champion. We're like a team. So my associate editors have a lot of power in terms of making their ultimate decisions. But now, perhaps I shouldn't say this to you, but sometimes we have a policy whereby when an article comes to us, we have a policy of finding 2 anonymous referees. Sometimes the contents of the article are so vague in the sense that, well, no one's working on this. How can we find a referee? Sometimes, very, very rare cases, we can only find one referee. And we make a decision based upon one referee's decision, which isn't ideal, but it happens. In those cases, I say to the associate referees, okay, you've only got one referee. You need to read that article yourself, and on the basis of your informed decision, being an expert in general in that field, you need to make a decision, just to endorse the first referee's ideas.
Yeah, because when I asked this question, I had an idea in my mind.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned Turkey, they now write a lot about Urartu. All people are King and East in Anatolia. And it is all ancient history, it is archaeology, okay, but they have in their mind that their roots go back to Urartu. How can you decide about this? Do you know about this idea in their minds?
So this is why the associate editors are so incredibly important, because they have better knowledge than I do about these things. And as I said, sometimes it's hard to find referees, and so for that reason, they will act as the second referee, which gives them a lot of power. But by and large, you know, we desperately try to avoid, not me personally, but journals in the UK, like, you know, the proper academic journals, they try to avoid any kind of promotion of, let's say, a view which could be construed as political. Now that's difficult because everything's political.
Yeah.
Wherever you have power in politics. But by and large, we try to avoid anything which is really explicit and right in your face.
Talking about the case of interdisciplinary.
Yeah. Oh, that's so hard. That's so hard. In that case, in an ideal scenario, which doesn't happen that often, you get one referee, let's say in anthropology, and you get another referee in politics. It happens sometimes in good cases, but not all cases. What I can say is that the people that we send their articles out to, in general, in the UK, in Western Europe, the people who serve as referees are usually respected people. We try to employ people who are experts in the field. Okay? So if we have an article which is interdisciplinary, maybe I don't have the expertise in that particular field, but I have a sufficient background to give a good opinion. So even though I'm not maybe, or a referee is not maybe an expert in the field, that specific field, they will be sufficiently educated and trained and be able to recognise whether the article is a genuine contribution to knowledge or whether it can perhaps engage in discussion with the wider academic community. But it's a problem.
Yes, I know.
Can I have a question? I was thinking about the referees.
Yeah.
Do you employ referees, or are they contacted? Is it network, or is it just that your friends in the fields? How do you?
I'm sure you realise that over the years you establish like a network. And because the journal I work with is quite large in the respect that I have 5 associate editors, if I can't find a referee for myself, or they can't find a referee for themselves, they will contact us as a team and say, who do you suggest? Sometimes if you don't know who to contact as a referee, what I suggest to my colleagues, read the article, look at the references, and choose somebody from the references. If the reference is critical, then that would be quite an interesting referee to have. Or if the reference is perhaps too positive, then maybe we should avoid that, because it's not being really analytical enough.
Cool. But some of the journals, they do suggest for you to choose.
They do.
Yeah.
They do. There are some journals which have like spaces that you can fill in when you upload the document, and you can say you do not want this referee, and you can even suggest referees.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know the International Refugees Journal of Oxford do.
But in the main, I think in the West, the referees that are used are not paid, so that they do this as part of their academic duties, if you like. So, I mean, most referees will accept an article to look at and referee simply because 9 times out of 10 they'll look at the article and say, oh, well, this is interesting, you know, and they do it as part of their goodwill duty to the discipline.
But Scopus hand out like a certificate for those, just a thank you. Some of the journals in North America, they give like a book voucher.
Oh, we don't give out book vouchers. We haven't got any.
Sorry, maybe my point is not relevant to the reviewers and the referees. Sometimes I do some proofreading for other people, they want to publish their papers. And the main problem that I saw with their papers they are planning to publish. First, they have a problem with the academic writing. And the second issue, which is, I believe, is the most important one, that they think in their own native language, and they try to reflect that in English. So this is really a problematic. I reviewed 2 days ago a paper in lit history, and she was giving her idea. It was in Arabic, but she wrote that in English. So even for myself, the idea by itself was vague. So I believe one of the main points for publishing is that we try to be, as you mentioned in the opening presentation, to be native or semi-native speakers. So editors or referees, as you mentioned, in well-known publishing journals, they can understand the idea and then it can go for, as you mentioned, minor corrections or major corrections.
I'm glad you raised that question because I think it is a very, very important point. And I came across it some time ago in relation to China. And someone was talking about missionary activity in 19th century China. And the term that was used, it kept coming over and over and over again, was the term question. But the problem is that the author hadn't really defined what the term question was. The term question is a kind of specific technical term that was used in Chinese to refer to Bible translations in Chinese. Okay? And it became known as the term question simply because there were all these technical terms in the Bible which needed to be translated in a specific way. Which is why I think collaboration between a native speaker and an English speaker is really essential for those kinds of articles where you have specific terminology. If you have specific terminology, the easiest way by far to get around the problem is just to insert a footnote and explain what is going on. Okay? But the collaboration, I think, between the author of the article and someone like yourself is absolutely essential. In an ideal situation, I don't know whether you did this or whether you do this, is if there is a problem, is to sit down with the writer, the author.
I take the views from the publishing journal and do the proofreading in light of the comments. Because sometimes there are grammatical mistakes.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say mistakes, it's like more than error because it is repeated all the time.
Yeah.
Like the third person singular or the the passive voice, the active voice, also the agreement, subject verb agreement. This is one of the problems I face with most of the researchers here inside the country. I also faced, as I told you, the idea by itself.
Yeah.
It's the things in Arabic or, for example, in Kurdish, and then he tried to write these ideas.
Well, I think you're in a very difficult position. Okay, I think
And it's not my field, the problem.
Well,
I'm just
exactly. I mean, it's
reading.
think on dentistry, for example.
Yeah.
The easiest scenario is for someone like you to sit down with the writer and actually work out what the argument is and what they're trying to say. If there are technical terms, to explain these in a footnote. I think that would be the easiest solution. But of course, I mean, it might be costly for the students to do these kind of things.
Well, it's a work for us.
That's true. True. Write a paper on it.
The suggestion for the individual is if you want to write in any language, you have to think in that language. So that's why you prevent this translation in your brain. So you have to straight think that language, you come out with writing.
It's hard.
Easier said than done.
Sorry?
It's easier said than done.
Easier said than done. I know. Yes.
Well, and the problem is that when you have different cultural backgrounds, you have different kinds of ways of thinking and ways of self-expression. So the way I think and I express myself is different from the way you do in English. I write in English, I do it my way.
That's really true, isn't it? That's hard.
Even when I read a text, an English text written by an Indian, I can distinguish it from a text written by an English language. Germans, for instance, use very long sentences. Englishmen, no, shorter. I really like also longer sentences than normally. And this makes problems for writing academically and compatible with the guidelines.
I think that's true, but as educated, as academics, we need to be conscious of those differences. Be aware that we are trying to publish in Western academic journals and perhaps change our language that kind of reflects the tastes of English readers. Now, that's not easy, is it? I mean, I can give you an example. I gave this example to my first year students in Glasgow. On page, whatever it is, 33 of Edward Said's Orientalism, it's a whole page, and there's not one full stop. Not one full stop. I said to my students, if you write me an essay like that, you'll get a big fat zero. Okay? Now, that may be because Said fundamentally is a Palestinian. And maybe Palestinians think in that way. So I don't be too critical of it. On the other hand, I think Edward Said tried to be seen as a postmodernist thinker, full of jargon, incomprehensible. Maybe I don't know. But no, I recognize the problem of seriousness. And I think perhaps the best thing to do is try to avoid those kind of problems by looking at articles which have been written by, let's say, people in the field, in your specific field, and perhaps not necessarily copy them, but be aware of the style that is used and the style that is acceptable for that particular journal. You know, I think that's perhaps the easiest thing, but I agree it is a cultural problem. in the way that you express yourself.
Sometimes in some languages where you express the main idea at the beginning,
Yeah.
and then, for instance, it comes at the very end of the paragraph. What you say.
Yeah, which is why I was stressing today with the abstracts. What you need is a simplified structure which looks at your research question, your what question, your why question, and your how question. If you do that, then you're perhaps making your students or making your readers critically aware of how to write. Because your abstract, in a way, is a summary of the whole of the article. What you're doing really is magnifying at great length what you've got in your abstract.
So when I read through the applications and the abstracts, I realized that a lot of the abstracts weren't contributing to a specific conversation or field. And the core question then is, could be asked, is how do you identify, I mean, I'm probably repeating myself here, how do you identify a field that you contribute to? And would you say that it might be a good idea to look at other academics in the field and look at their CVs and what kind of things they're writing? Is this something that interests you?
Yeah, no, I think it's an important point too. It's something that we've got to mention, so I'm really glad you mentioned that too. One of the most vital points of undergraduate training for writing essays is signposting. Signpost your essay. So like in your introduction to your essay, you signpost exactly what you're going to do, what you're going to be writing. Okay? Which fits in with what you're saying, because by doing the signposting, you are positioning yourself within a particular discipline. So for example, in the signposting, you could include elements in which you talk about your methodology, which could be, let's say, academic psychological analysis, it could be economic data, it could be anything. But you situate yourself within a certain discipline, okay, which is helpful for readers of the article, obviously, because they want to know what's going to go on. There are some people who write articles, and it's like a stream of consciousness. It just comes out, big flow of stream of conscious words, and you don't get to the final conclusion of what it's all about until the very end. Some people love that form of writing. Personally, I hate it. Okay? So if I have an article which is submitted to me, and I don't have a clear abstract, and I don't have signposting in the introduction, then it's very unlikely that that article will go further in the refereeing process. Remember too, that in a way I'm a filter for the referees. If a referee gets a stream of consciousness, the likelihood is that they won't even bother responding to me. Referees like to have things clear-cut, precise. Their time is limited too. You know, they have a limited amount of time because they're doing their own research and whatever it is people do. I don't know that because I'm doing my own research. But you know, they want things clear-cut, precise, and simple. So if you have that, if you position yourself at the very start of your article, and make a clear where you're coming from, which may include a general discipline, it may be interdisciplinary, okay? It may be something that you haven't done before. It may be something which is tangential to your major body of previous research. It doesn't matter, so long as it's clear what you're doing and where you position yourself, that's fine. So that's a really good point.
Which we'll be looking at in the abstracts. So, do you want to have to be with us, Sarah? Yeah. Would you like to speak?
Sure, yeah. Put me on the spot
All right.
immediately.
So Dr. Sarah Felix is our lead trainer from the London School of Economics, and she's the person who designed this program. She's just arrived, I think, 3 hours ago?
Yeah, at 11 o'clock this morning, I arrived. So, overnight flight. I'm working off of the energy, you know, sort of sleepless energy.
And Dr. Sarah has worked in the Middle East before, so she sort of understands the standards and the needs and where people are starting from. We've worked in UCL in Qatar.
In Qatar, yeah.
Right, and we've worked in Afghanistan, Kazakhstan.
Kazakhstan, and I've worked in Turkey, and I've worked in Egypt. Basically, throw a dart at a map of the world, and chances are I've worked at least close to it.
Yeah. would you like to talk about some of the issues here? I mean, for instance, criticality, critical insights, because I think that's one of the core parts of our workshop. If you want to start with that.
Yeah, sure. So, and we're going to talk about, I'll go. Let me be seen. So, and we're going to go into this a little bit tomorrow as well. And I've got, because academics, especially Western academics, British, American academics, love to talk about critical thinking and criticality and where's your critical stance, but no one actually tells you what that means. So we're going to actually talk about that a little bit tomorrow. But the reason I sort of bring that up is because actually, when you start to ask people what that means, no one actually agrees. So just like everything else that we study as academics, it's another argument that different people have different views on, which makes it very difficult to write critically. Because if people don't agree on what it means, how do you show you're being critical? What I like to say to people is, what I've said a lot is, imagine you have just a little person that sits in your head and sits there going, why? And you come up with an answer to that why. And they go, why again? And you have to figure out what the answer to that why is. And then they go, why again? And about 4 layers why. Actually, if any of you have met a 2-year-old, that's what a 2-year-old does to you, right? Until you finally get tired and you're like, because. So criticality and what, like getting published in journals and writing in sort of this way is all about being able to show that you've thought about the why and you have answers behind those. So why do I think this is happening? Or why is this a question I should be answering? Why is this a field worth studying? Why do I have a different take on this? So anywhere where you can ask the question why and you can show it, you can write about it, that's sort of getting into criticality. And that's really central to writing and being able to show it from the beginning. Like when I walked in, the conversation we were having was point late versus point early, basically. So some language groups, you don't tell us what you're arguing for until the end. And in other languages, you tell us the point at the beginning. So English is a point early language. You tell us what you're going to say, you demonstrate why that's what you want to say, and then you tell us you said it. It's very boring, it's very dry, it's very English. And then we're gonna, so the whole way this workshop's sort of set up is there's the practical stuff, there's the outlining, there's the structure, but then there's the sort of how are you saying what you need to say inside that. Because it can be the most beautifully structured piece of work. If it doesn't represent you, what's the point? So we're going to try to work on both sides of that. So that's sort of this overview. I mean, do you have questions? Wow.
Yeah, the other issue in this program we talk about is Voices from the Middle East, which actually is about what you're speaking about,
Yeah.
your voice. I mean, this is a core question, and hopefully we'll be addressing this tomorrow and the day after. And again, it's about also contributing to the field. It's about how do you develop an academic's voice? What is an academic voice?
What is an academic voice? Wow, that's actually a big question. Well, I'll sort of backtrack going to the importance of Middle Eastern voices. When you just have the same voices, the same ideas being sort of shared over and over again, a field doesn't grow, right? And as an academic, where I am in my field, so I'm a sociologist, my area of expertise, sociology of education, right? I couldn't be where I am in my thinking without other people having challenged the field at different points. And so the idea and the importance of having Middle Eastern voices is you have something different. We all have something different to bring to the field. And if we don't have your voice represented internationally in the field, that field is never going to know what it's missing, and it's going to never know what it should be questioning itself on. Right? So in terms of, so my own personal agenda for why I'm here is very much one of getting your voices heard outside of this space, because the field's not going to grow. And there are edges of the field that really need to be questioned in any field. or where in the social sciences and humanities, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, a lot of questioning, and sort of needling and pointing and saying, actually, when you think about our context, when you think about where we work, this idea doesn't work. We need a different idea, or we need to see things differently, or we need to maybe question this area, or raise up these ideas. And that's what publishing is meant to be. It's meant to be sharing the ideas so someone else can then take it further, and someone else can take it further, right? It has a life on its own. You're sort of having a dialogue with other academics. And so I guess an academic argument or having an academic voice is one that is informed by a field, so is informed by your, those that came before you, but is one that is trying to push forward, trying to either look somewhere where someone hasn't looked before, or trying to critique it, to question it, to say, maybe there's something else going on. So that to me is sort of the heart of what an academic voice is, which is very up here. Of course, the practicality of how you do that is another story.
So, before you came, I asked our participants to prepare questions in their core questions, and this was the time to discuss some of those questions. I know you've asked us some questions, but because the program can change depending on what you need. So this is not just a blueprint; it depends on what you need. And over the next 2 days, we can change this to suit some of the questions that you have in answering those questions. So I think if we can go around, and if you have any specific questions regarding your own problems and challenges in publishing, I've heard some of them before, and I think we do have a sort of general idea, but it would be good to, if anyone has quite specific things they need to address, or need us to change in the program based on those questions. So if anyone wants to say anything about that.
Can I just say, if I've said anything this morning, and I didn't give you a satisfactory answer, now is the ideal time to raise it again. Because here we have an expert. she can express herself in the answers to those questions far better than I can. So if there's anything that needs repetition or elaboration, don't be afraid to raise it again.
I'll take the first hand I saw going up.
First, in social servers, we have some difficulties for publishing international magazines. So we want to know what's the standard of language for writing research to be acceptable in the international magazines.
Well, you can help with this as well, yeah.
Should we take some questions and go around, or do we say one by one? Okay.
Quick answer to that is that if an article comes to me, I can understand what's written, okay? It goes up to referees. If I get an abstract and I can't understand what's been said, then I send it back to the author. Okay, so if it's comprehensible, even if there may be mistakes, typos, grammatical errors, stylistic flaws, if it's understandable, then we get it refereed because there's a repetition that it has value.
But sometimes they return to the author that the language is poor or weak language.
Those are the fake journals. No, seriously, I'm sure there will be some journals that take that approach. It will just depend from journal to journal. Unfortunately, there's no standardization.
So we need in this workshop to have a list of real journals.
It will be interesting to establish that. You go around your colleagues to work out which are the journals which are perhaps, let's say, more sympathetic towards non-native English speakers. It might be quite useful to have that kind of database.
Yeah, I would say in terms of the journals, look at the people who you're reading and who you like within the field and where are they publishing. Because that will give you a sense of what journals publish the type of research you want and are publishing the quality of research that you're using. And so I think that's a good sort of way of telling if a journal's worthwhile or not, is who are they publishing. So So are they publishing the people that I'm reading? Then chances are that's where I want to go. Because there's no magic list and the list is constantly changing. And I would say, yeah, my experience as a reviewer is definitely, by the time the articles get to me, they're definitely comprehensible. There are grammatical errors, and part of my reviewing, I might say, be aware to make this kind of mistake. But it doesn't influence whether or not it gets accepted or not. As long as it is understandable, that's the key thing. If you use, if you have sentences that are slightly too long, or if you use too many subordinate clauses, it doesn't matter as long as it's understandable. That's the key marker. If we can understand it, it's fine.
One of the disadvantages I think that's cropped up in recent years is that there's been a mushroom of journals. And I think one of the reasons that we have this mushroom of journals is because they are businesses. Because they are businesses, they offer an English proficiency, well not English proficiency, but an English checking service, but it's expensive. So it's best to avoid that. It's best to get someone in your field, for example, if you have maybe a PhD student who's fantastic at English, or maybe your university or institute has some kind of like a subsidiary institute for English language, try and get someone there involved in your project. That's perhaps the best way to approach it, rather than use the service provided by the journals, because people who actually work in the journals, well, the editors, of course, are specialists, but the people who provide the linguistic service aren't really experts in your field. So you can include, for example, technical terms, and they could completely trash it. It's just nonsense. So find someone that you can trust, someone that you know. That's perhaps the best way to approach the linguistic problem. I know.
Can I ask a question?
Well, over here and then we'll come over there. Just
Michael, he has a correct voice, so he raised the question about in which case the researcher, when he's 100% sure that his hypothesis is real and accurate, but at the same time, he doesn't want that the reviewers to reject this hypothesis, and they consider that as a kind of reckless or a kind of. So he's 100% of his hypothesis, but at the same time, he doesn't want to be refused by the journal or the reviewers.
That's a delicate balance. Well, one is it that particular journal? Maybe you're choosing the wrong journal. Maybe you need to choose a journal that's willing to go the direction you want. So that could be one of the issues. The other thing is, if you're confident and you lay out your evidence, you lay out why you stand behind this argument, and you sort of join the dots, put it forward. If it gets rejected, try a different journal. If it gets, feedback, you know what they're saying to change. But don't let fear of rejection stop you from submitting. Because chances are you'll get some feedback that's rejected. And the field's not going to grow if people are too scared to put out novel or different ideas. Well, I don't know if I want to take it.
Yeah, shall I start? In the, I don't know if you have a copy of that.
I actually wrote it, but I don't
The
have
program.
it in front of me.
What are the acceptance criteria? So you highlight basically criticality, argument, contribution to the field. I want you to talk about a little bit about the argument, if you could please.
There's a session tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll be talking in detail on argument tomorrow. It's the morning session, so we'll be talking about research questions and argument. But yeah, that argument is, it has to be clear, it has to be understood, and it has to be sort of, like I was saying, forefront of what you say, explain why it works, and then sort of review it. Do you want to say anything about it?
I think do tomorrow.
Do it tomorrow? Okay.
I just want to ask about academic voice. My question is related to the first question she asked about. It's also about language. So the academic voice is how to bring the academic voice in Middle East as an international journal. And we have a big challenge, which is the language. So how we can defeat this challenge? I mean, as example, is there's like a research group as first action for that, so we can group that kind of voice in the Middle East and bring them to the international journal.
So, I mean, so as someone who's actually, before I went into academia, was also an English teacher, let me just say something. In terms of just your spoken word right now, you have the language. So it's not a language problem in terms of your ability to articulate in English. It may be a language problem in terms of, are you speaking the way journals expect academics to speak, which is very different, because you can be 100% grammatically correct and have a beautiful, and people not like your argument, and it gets misdiagnosed as language. But it's a misdiagnosis. What it really is the journal has an expectation of how arguments are made, an expectation of what it looks like in a structure, an expectation of what certain sections are going to do. And for some reason, you're breaking the expectation. And a lot of times it's that breaking of expectation that leads to a rejection rather than an actual linguistic problem. And that is different in terms of how different language groups form arguments. I know when I was working in Qatar, I was working with cultural heritage students that were doing masters and doctorates in Qatar. And brilliant ideas, but they would write, it was this almost beautiful layering of ideas on top of each other. So we'd have this one thing, and then there was this layer, and then there was this layer, and then there was this layer, and only then did we get to the point. It's beautiful, and it'll never get accepted in an English language journal because it breaks the expectation. So I think that's what the issue is. So in a way, that's why I've designed it this way, is working from the assumption, which assumptions are always dangerous, but that's what's happening. Because just listening to you, listening to how questions are articulated right now, having read some of the abstracts, it's not a linguistic problem. You have the English skills.
Can I just reinforce something that you pointed out, in fact? I think it's really imperative for scholars in Iraq to actually read the kind of style, the journals to which they're sending their articles. Because there's a specific journal style, specific journal English, okay? You don't have to be clever to do this. I mean, it's basic, imitation, if you like. Because as you say, I mean, you've got the linguistic skills. It's just learning how to write in academic English. So let me give you an example. In this journal, Iran, over the past few years, we've had loads and loads of submissions from PhD students from Iran. Why? Because one of the criteria in Iran for getting a PhD is to have an academic journal in, let's say, a Western journal. Okay? Now, according to Iranian style of writing academic journals, academic articles for English in English, they use bullet points. Bullet points to reinforce their argumentations. Whereas in Western journals, if you have a bullet point, it will be struck off immediately. Okay? So that's just an example of being familiar with the kinds of style that's really necessary to embrace, if you like, if you want to get published in Western journals. Look at the style of the articles that you're sending your work to. And I can guarantee if you read maybe 3 or 4, you'll pick it up straight away. It's easy.
Just one thing, that's for you as editors and people who receive articles from, Middle East or something. I taught the past research methodology for a master's student in my university. Actually, one of the issues before going to the fact of writing issues with writing, it's about issues with reading critically. And one of the issues, like you're mentioning about analyzing, it's straightforward, you just analyze a paper and then you write similar style. Believe it or not, that's a struggle in itself, analyzing a paper, because sometimes I say, well, the answer is there. You have a lot of, it's like an open book, an open exam, because you have the things, you just look at it and then mimic the style, and then you are there. But then why they are not getting it? It's not that because they it's not that they have limitation with writing. It's because of they don't read well. And in fact, that's something when I attended a workshop on how to read at graduate level. Because it's different, you know. In undergraduate level, you read more for content. In graduate studying, you know, more
So I
for structure.
think what you're saying, that's a key word that you just mentioned. It's being familiar with the structure, how to formulate and read and look and identify structure in the article.
Absolutely.
So if students or researchers can identify structures, then that's half the problem solved.
In fact, it's very easy because the rest is just the matter of reading, but sometimes it's just a matter of being able to analyze it because it's just very straightforward. And I observe it in my students and I hear it all over the place. You know, of course, I was also teaching something related to research for teaching capacity development program, and the same problem I see it consistently. It's being able to actually analyze the matter.
Okay, so if that's the case, then, I mean, just off the top of my head that comes to mind is, okay, so let's say you find an author or an article that you really like stylistically. So when you read it, you're just like, yeah, I can read this well, I like this, right? And we all have different authors whose style we like. We have other people who we read and we really like their ideas, but we hate reading them. I can name so many people off the top of my list who I love their ideas, but I really wish they wrote better. So there are other people who they just write, who I like reading. And so when you find someone like that, it's about asking the questions, okay, things like, how early do they tell us where their argument is? How do they then tell us how they're going to make that argument? At what point? And what language are they using? Because you can mimic language, you know, this is the signposting language. You can mimic the structure. What is the first section of their article about in terms of what is it doing? Not in terms of the content, but is it providing background? Is it looking at theory? Is it explaining somebody else's ideas and why it's not enough? So what's the next thing? And sort of, it's what I call reverse outlining. So when you write an article, in theory, you start with an outline, right? You have, okay, this is what I want to say, this section, then I'm going to have this section, then I'm going to conclude this way. Do a reverse outline. Look at someone's article that you like and reverse outline it. So how are they structuring it? So, okay, what do they have in their introduction? At what point in their introduction do I do their argument? What's the next section about? How do they build it? What's the next section? So doing reverse outlining. And then using that structure to now make your own.
And actually, that's what I always call it reverse engineering.
Yeah.
So I even use the metaphor of cake, a recipe versus a cake, and that's even for writing a proposal. So I say when you write a proposal, it's like you have a recipe, tell you these are the ingredients and this is how you mix it as a methodology, like how to prepare it. But then when you read a paper, you need to try to reverse engineering. You need to try to think about what proposal, what research question, how this has been formulated here. So it's like now you have a cake. Now you have to undo the cake and try to taste it and say, oh, that means there's this ingredient in it. So you are analyzing it to go back to the very basic structure. So that's why I was using the cookbook analyze. And I searched it. I was using cake, then it turned out someone was calling it actually a cookbook or a recipe, something like that. Quite frankly, I didn't plagiarize, but somehow we were thinking at the same line. For me, it came from the need, the question that I was getting, and it was making me think, like, very hard trying to explain this, and I couldn't, and then I have to be creative in the thing I mean. But I mean, you are absolutely right. Reverse outlining will be, which comes with active reading.
Yes, yes. Which, and which hopefully you're doing in order to be able to come up with your own research, right? You've had to be reading and analyzing, critiquing. So now it's just a different way of analyzing the article. So now you're analyzing it for how did they build it? How did they put it together? And then once you figured out how they built it, you can build yours in the same style. It can be a completely different argument, but you're just using their style to build it.
So,
We'll go there and then there.
My question is about, is there any criteria for writing abstract? That means you must or you should focus on the definitions of terms at the first time, which idea you need to investigate, and then you must to focus on aims of the study, and then model, and then novelty or originality, and after that findings, or it is needed also to focus on problems and how to treat the problems. Or this case, or this matter depends on the journal policy.
I mean, so the key of an abstract, nobody here is from mathematics, I'm imagining, or computer science. So abstraction is an actual thing that you, right? It's the essence of something. So if you're boiling something down, oh God, I'm going to cooking. What have you done? If you boil something down, like let's say, you know, anything, a juice or whatever, or the more it boils down, the more you get like the concentrated essence. So that's what an abstract is in a sense. And so in a way, a little bit of it is going to be shaped by what your article is doing, but it's really in one sentence. What is, you know, it's a series of one sentences of, here's what my article is about, here's the argument, here's why it's original, here are the basis of my methodology, and here's the implications of it. In, you know, very short, 200 words to the point. And so it's almost an art in terms of being able to take this huge idea that's really complex, that draws all these different things together and just say, this is the essence of it. I would have liked
Yes, absolutely. I
Yeah.
completely agree with you. All I would say, I mean, you know, you were asking about what to do with technical terms and these kind of things. If you have technical terms, there's no reason why you can't use them in the abstract, but you would need to define them in the main body of your text. So I would completely agree with everything you say. I mean, in terms of your abstract, as I said earlier on today, you need your three questions, your what, your why, and your how. Then you've covered the basics.
Sometimes I find this matter depends on the journal policy. I think so it's different from journal to another journal when you write your abstract.
Well, I guess, I mean, I've just said I think it's quite useful if you're able to define your terms in the main body of your thesis, in main body of your article. But I guess it will depend on the nature of your technical term. If it's quite a short technical term, then yeah, okay, include it in your abstract. If it's like a long one, and it's really, really technical, and no one else knows what it is, then of course you shouldn't use it. So you know, you just have to use a bit of, for want of a better term, some common sense, and look at what other people have done in previous articles in the same journal, and see what kind of style, what kind of methods they use.
What the main point it is needed to mention when you like to write an abstract.
Yeah. So just as you say, just focus upon like the distillation or the essence of the argument, and that'll be sufficient.
The abstract for this project, so when I wrote the project proposal for this workshop, it was 150 words.
No, I mean in general.
Yeah.
I write to submit
the point of making
to my article to any any journal.
Yeah. But I'm also making the point that, as was just mentioned, it is just short sentences. You know, what I want to do, what this workshop is about, and obviously the British Academy is also a research organization, so they look at these things also sort of academically, intellectually. But the abstract for this publishing workshop was just 150 words. I mean, I wanted to include more, but I only had 150 words, and if you go over it, you're penalized when you're writing grant proposals. And I think it's also the same in academic journals. They won't accept it. Maybe I think maximum, maybe some, I don't know how many words is it.
Well, sometimes when you fill in a particular box,
Yeah.
you can't go over the maximum.
Yes, it doesn't even allow
Stops.
you to hit that period or even
How many words do you accept for the British Journal of Middle Eastern Studies?
There's no fixed number in terms of instructions for authors. We can just tell by looking at it. If it's in the region of 200 to 300, it's fine. If it's more than that, if it's more than one page, forget it, it's too much.
Yes.
And so that's the thing, is if you're spending all your time defining your terms, your abstract is not going to tell us what your actual article is about. And that's the key, is if it's just a quick one line and it's important, that's fine. But if it's If you're spending all that time defining terms, that doesn't belong in the abstract. What belongs in the abstract is the essence, the bare bones, like if we were to remove, oh gosh, it's a bit violent, all the meat and flesh. Your abstract is just the bone.
Actually, to add to that, I tell my students, and they love when I say, I remind them about a famous quote from Mark Twain. It says, if I have time, I would have written a shorter letter. Just think about how writing contents would actually take more time and more intellectual ability to, because you have to condense things. And one time when I was flying, and then I was in my research methodology mode, and then I saw, this summary for movies. Some of them are 2 hours, some of them may be longer. And then there was, one of them was expressed with 1 line or 2 lines. So I said, if a movie can catch you with 1 line or 2 lines, and they want to make you, it's kind of the same thing. They want to say, this is a brief of the movie, and this is a movie. So how can they manage to summarize it to, this thing, and yet they are telling you something with it? So that's, I was thinking of a good exercise of summarizing things, because you are summarizing a movie in a few sentences.
Yeah. And just, to be honest, when I write an abstract, you can already see the look of pain. My initial abstracts are always too long. And then I start cutting them, then I get angry, I walk away, I complain to a friend, I come back to it, I throw away what I've written and just start from the beginning again. It's a little shorter, and then I cut some more, and then eventually it's short enough. So don't work from the assumption that when you write an abstract or anything, that the first time you write it is actually what you're going to do. Because that process of getting to the essence, you know so many details about your research and you understand so many elements that you're going to want to put all of it in there because you can't imagine how anyone would understand what you're saying unless you include that. So your first draft, do that. And then throw it away and write it again. And it's okay to be annoyed by it. It's okay to feel like it's very painful, because that's what it is. Because you're really being forced to say, this is what my research is, even though I know there's so much more to it.
But do you write the abstract before writing the article or after?
After. Definitely after.
So what's quite interesting is that I don't think there's any one definitive way or definitive style of writing an abstract. However, I think sometimes the less acutely technical it is, the less technically acute, the better. So, for example, when you go into a PhD, often the first question that an examiner will ask is, if you go into a coffee shop, okay, and you're standing next to someone and they ask you, what are you doing? What's your PhD about? How do you respond to that person in such a way to make it comprehensible? That's quite an interesting way, a good way maybe to think about an abstract too. Because one of the ways that you might want to think about widening your network, broadening your field, is to appeal to a more, let's say, general reader, although they're interested in your field. So if the abstract is too technical, you've lost them already. Forget it. So make it accessible, not banal and simple, but make it accessible to people to read. So that you can make your detailed and defined points and your definitions in the main body, but do it gradually. Pull them in, be a fisherman, or a woman, or whoever.
We have the abstract session tomorrow, and I think Lloyd will be looking at different examples of good abstracts, and I'll also point the abstracts that we have anonymously. We can also have a look at those abstracts and how we can improve them. I think that's one way.
Yeah, definitely.
ئەم پرسیارەی من هەڵا ئەوەیە زۆرێک لە ئەو خوێندکارانەی کە لێرەوە ڕۆشتون بۆ ئەوروپا کاتێک کە خوێندکاری توانسازی کاتێک کە دەستیان کردو بە نووسین ئەو ڕخنیان لێژێت کە ئەو ئامانجەی ئەوان هەیەە بە دەوری ئەقرێنەوە ناچنە ناوەڕۆژی ئامانجەکە وەکە ئەیانەیەک دوێت ڕاستەوخۆ نایە بە دەوری بابەتەکە ئەسوڵێت ئامانجەکەەوە
أساسية هي بعملة كردية سواء.
ئەو ئاماژەی کە ئێمە ئەمانەیە بیبیکی لە سەرەتای توێژینەکەەوە ئاماژەکە بڵێن دوایی بکەین دیتێلی بێنێت یان لە سەرەتای دیتێڵەکە بێن ئاماژەکە بخێنە کۆتایی.
So, Dr. Hirsch was asking a question about, we had a program here in Kurdistan region of Iraq called Human Capacity Development, HCD, that we were sending masters and PhD students abroad to do masters and PhD. And Dr. Hirsch was asking, and this is something we noticed in those students, and I was commenting, that's actually a cultural thing. He was saying, I see them like they go around the object and they stay. They don't go to the specificality of it. They just like, it's like they are, in fact, the way he was drawing it reminded me of the language, different cultures, how they speak. One of them is spiral and the other one, direct and thing. So it's something like that. He says, so is it better to actually go with, starting with the objective very clearly and say, and then go to details? Or you say details and later on state the objectives?
I always fear to say anything definitively because there is an element of style here. But generally speaking, it's better to start with the definitive, the points, and then go into the details, usually.
And that's, I think, the English writing way, because English, I know, because I have been to a few workshops that were talking about, for example, cultures with, Middle Eastern, Asian, and think that some of them, they give high context, low context, that's what it is. Give lots of context and then get to the point, or say the point and then provide clarification. But trust me, when you write that here, it would be a bit awkward, and I do experience that when I speak. Allah başta specific really objective like a chia and I think one of the feedback is to under that. And they always say two triangles, two flipping triangles. Yes.
Well, it's two triangles with a huge square in between.
Yes,
I almost wish I
was
had
your slide. That was an excellent.
So it very much is. Your introduction acts as a, here's the field, here's the debate, here's why it matters type thing. Here's my answer. Then all the reasons why your answer works, either looking at whether it's theoretically based, whether it's empirically based, whatever type of argument you're making, sort of all the things that back it up and all the details and all the nuance and all the different factors, and then the upside down triangle again, where you restate why you're saying all of this, and then tell us why the argument matters for the field.
And on that in TOEFL exam, one of the tips that they tell you to prepare for reading, they say sometimes you may not be able to read everything, just read the first sentence in each paragraph. It should have the summary of each paragraph. So basically that's because in English thesis statement, present the summary of the whole paragraph, so that means once you have this, then basically you have the idea. So that should tell you about how a good English article should be written.
But that only works if the writer is of an English-speaking background. So for example, if you get a French author writing in English, or a German author writing in English, they won't do that.
Well, that's what I'm trying to do is do the reverse outline, saying if that's what tell you if you write that, look at these cues, then that means if you want to write, do this.
Yes, definitely.
Can I add a statement here? Probably it benefits this discussion. You know why I would like to add something here. I think it's all about that academic writing skill and critical thinking skill. It's not that much simplified. Sorry, you are trying to simplify it and show sympathy, but I think the problem is much deeper. With those people going abroad and doing research, I've been through some of those experiences, and I see. Sometimes I struggle reading something in my language by authors of my native, but I cannot go further. I stop. I throw away the book. So it's all about that style of writing.
Yes.
A couple of months ago, I read a PhD thesis full of novelty, full of information, analysis, but there was 6 pages without a dot, not one single page in Kurdish. So it's all about that. They always, because they're not directly. They don't. So sometimes this show a sort of level of intellectuality. They try to show that, which doesn't worth anything in international academic context. But this is probably more cultural, as you said, more cultural structure of the thinking, even in academic way. I have read many things in Kurdish, in Arabic, in Persian as well. They do the same. So it's all about, I think there is a standard, there is a sort of paradigm that we have to accept, I guess. A paradigm of academic, English-speaking, academic atmosphere that we have to accept to be able to write. And within that, I don't mean that there is one standard, one template that we have to follow from A to Z. No, there's no one template. But I think we have to get out from what our academic mentality are now actually using in their writing.
I think we have rules of punctuation in our grammar, but I think the problem is lack of training in that, or we don't think that is important enough to learn.
You're not the only one. So I'm originally I'm Portuguese, Portuguese speaking, and the Portuguese rules of grammar are much softer when it comes to long sentences. They're not as strict. Whereas in English, you know, there's only so much you can add to a sentence before it's considered grammatically incorrect. So there are different grammatical rules that you're then trying to translate. But there's also, I think, this belief within the academy that we all have in our heads that long sentences demonstrate intellectual rigor. And it's not true. Like, it's something and I think of different I mean, you were talking about Edward Said, I think of, Michel Foucault, I think of, these long, insane sentences. And we do have, Judith Butler's another one. We have this view of long sentences demonstrates intellectual thinking. It's not true. Because all you're doing is making it more difficult for the person reading it. And academic English and academic writing, a lot of it is about you making the work easier for your reader. It's not the reader who has to do the work, it's you as the writer. So even just rereading your work, like write it for yourself, but then rereading it going, do I need to shorten my sentences? Do I need to break up these sentences? Do I need to show how these ideas link with a linking sentence? And not getting caught up in that sort of belief that longer is somehow better.
I would say sometimes that's because we mix, at least sometimes what I notice from some discussions with people here, is that they mix between creative writing and academic writing. Creative writing has this thing, you need myth, you need to put more mystery thing to the end, you don't reveal everything. Unlike academic writing, which has to be very direct, clear, simple, so that for people to understand what you need.
It's really boring. Like, I think I've said it already, like, you say what you're going to say, you give the details and you say it, and then you say that you said it. I mean, it's incredibly boring.
No.
As a structure.
Let me give you an analogy. It's like a jigsaw. Okay, you have the picture to begin with, and then you fit the pieces together.
And then you have the picture. Sure.
So it's not boring.
Yeah, if you have jigsaw puzzles. It's a great analogy. But yeah, I mean, actually, that's a really good analogy, right? The idea is there is no
just remember.
So you shouldn't hide the picture from your reader. And you shouldn't leave any of the pieces out of the box,
But then imagination should put together.
Yeah. But in that sense, it's very different from creative writing, where you are unfolding a story.
Yes.
And it's only at the end that you really understand the whole beauty of the story.
Or sometimes leaving you for unknown.
I think that's professional imperialism to some extent. Just I'll give you through my experience when we wrote to a British journal, not academic, and using some English style words. They asked us to change because we are the ancestors of English language. That's one. and I worked for an international organization, and we write a report. He said, we have American funded, you please change all of these British style to American style. Sometimes just they want to show, as Franz Fanon mentioned, that's such type of professional imperialism, and there is no need to make a standardized or making criteria for that, to be more indigenous, to be more local. And I'm thinking in my context, I lived in Kurdistan, that's my life, my faith. How I can think in a British way or American way, that's
And so that's the careful balance that I'm hoping we can reach. Because it's about how do we get you published in journals that are doing that. I would, say make sure you research the journals, find out what language base they use. So I have this problem because I started off going to American universities and then I switched to the British system, and even I get things sent back and going, please be consistent in your use of OU instead of OUR instead of OR. It drives me up the wall. So there's that end, but then it's also about how do we make sure that we can get your voice, which I'm hoping is a critical voice, that is a different voice, that is bringing local knowledge and saying how that local knowledge helps us understand the field and change the field in a way that they accept it. Like it's this weird balance of how do I keep the ideas and the complexity and the beauty of the ideas inside this very rigid system. And it is possible. I mean, again, Fanon got there. I mean, amazing post-modernist, post-colonial critical voices gotten there, so I know it's possible. But it is that. And it's also, once you know what the rules are, you can choose which ones you want to break. So I'm a firm believer in breaking the rules once you know what they are. And so a little bit, I hope, will be that as well, is you going, okay, I get what the rules of the game now. Now what rules do I want to break? Because then it's you choosing to, and if they reject you because of that, that was your choice. It wasn't because your ideas weren't good. It was because you chose to do something. And that's powerful. But you can only make that choice if you know what the game is.
We see the language as a tool, not as a goal for us, just for understanding each other's.
Yes.
80% to 90%, all of these English who speak, that's not native speakers across the world, for example.
Yes.
But you can understand so easily.
Yep.
Well, unfortunately, you have also to bear in mind that you're submitting like an article to a journal. So a journal has specific rules, and you can't mix and match the styles. So it has to have like a set of instructions for authors. So if you follow those instructions, you're on safe ground. If you make a conscious decision not to, for whatever reason, then you need to have the confidence that the journal will accept it. If not, it's a waste of your time. It's a waste of their time. So you need to be aware of what you're doing at the very first minute past the hour. Straight away, you need to know what you're doing. But I appreciate it's a problem.
Yeah, but all journals have a style guide. So before you even are thinking of submitting, go to that style guide and make sure you follow the style guide as you're writing it. So that's a technical thing.
Question and a comment, please. Comments upon my good friend, Rozhen. It seems that the core feature of this collection of very wonderful scholars is the language. How do we speak? How do we write? How do we express ourselves in terms of how do we present our study? What's the meaning of writing? What's the meaning of writing? Anyway.
Communication.
Evidently. And rules.
Thank you.
Writing is the fifth domain out of 6 in the brain. Fluency, comprehension, naming, reading, writing, and repetition. These are encircled by the term language, which is the function of the brain, one of the highest functions of the human being. That is the language. It's quite different from speaking. So when you write, it depends upon what? It's an acquired skill. Year after year,
you should have a foundation upon which you will be building up these 6 domains. So, no one can buy without knowing involved in 6 domains altogether.
What happens is that if you want your piece of work to be gold star, which means any
native or
access it,
in native language or
give your money to the language.
it's not selected. Write down and write down and write down. So it's an acquired discount. And condition grievances in the brain.
Very, very
So, if you are above the age of 40, this acquired discount becomes a sluggish
accessible immediately only to those people who subscribe to.
And that's why one of the problems
after 2 years
is the foundation in English language.
That's
That's why most of the scholars are afraid of this giant evil of how to write, how to submit into the right? Right. By the way, nowadays, since 2014 and 15, the States, the journal editors in chief and the so-called
it's when they say to me, do you realize that the article
it's not the responsibility of the journal to bring a copy editor to correct the language of the source.
That's the only time that they intervene.
So
they're not allowed to make a quick
writing system in your brain. You cannot learn
Thank you for
absolutely
that.
no.
five a lot of views.
So once an
Also,
article
to retreat.
to the entrance, we don't know whether the author wants it to be told or written.
As with any skill,
Our process is simply to get the article.
there are those that learn with no training, and there are those that go through, and so there are different ways of learning. So, for example, when you learn to write in school, you aren't just said, figure it out and learn on your own. You're given these tools, instructions to put words together to figure out how to write, how sounds are made, how to create stories. Even in school, you're taught these things. So there is, yes, it's a skill, and you need practice.
The skill of art, it's unconditioned reflex. When you express your thoughts in terms of what it depends on 6 domains of your domain. Say it's time for consolidate, retreat, no.
Yeah. It's like any, I would compare it to learning to play violin as another example, right? Learning to play violin. If you've ever met someone who's a professional musician, the amount of time of practice that they put in every single day, it's intense. So they didn't start off being good. They developed it. They also had teachers. Yes, it's practice. But practice, it's practice in a certain way. It's practice in creating the holistic thing.
But that's why I'm saying it's really important to understand.
I think the issue of language is over-exaggerated because it's not only that somebody reads your language because your language is poor. For instance, we have in international security, there's terms that we may not be able to use. So, for instance, we have a lot of people in my university. We read each other's research, but people here, they're afraid of feedback from partners, like peer review. Like it's that if you're afraid of me giving you feedback as a close person, then how do you expect from somebody that you don't know? But we, among my groups, like my friends, we create a cycle in which we read each other's research. We don't have to feel that somebody would learn from me, somebody would steal my work or copy mine. And then, after we do this, we send it to somebody who's close to native or a native. Besides that, that's very, very fine to do it, I think. We don't have issue that Iraq, no one can speak English. We have brilliant people that they do editing and they do speaking, but the problem is comes from the researchers, not from other that we have lacks of reviewing. So, and then if we do this, it would be very easy to publish. Besides, it's not only that we read this stable structure, because sometimes there's semantic things that it may not be logical to write something in this theory. Like if I send it to the person, he knows if this method or theory, or if
There's no one way to
even words are used correctly or not. For instance, I have a paper on migration, Syria and Middle East, and I was PhD student in 2014, and it was published by Public Magnet. It was among the 19 researchers that only 7 were chosen. But then I got feedback because I used a civilization that the professor from UK, he rejected to be used this way. He said that I would only let it published if she accepts this content to be changed. So sometimes there's things that there's mismatch. It's not about the language. It's maybe a mismatch of theories or knowledge, or that you may not be aware that you're using.
So, and you allude to something that I cannot stress enough. So I have never submitted anything, actually even for a comment from less, that I have not sent to a colleague to look at. So I have a group of people I trust, who I trust how they think, I trust their critique, I trust how they critique, because sometimes people critique in different ways. Do not expect to be able to write something and submit something without having you have colleagues, you have others in the field, you have others writing similar things. They may not be, language experts, because they can read it and know if the ideas make sense, how you're expressing it works, and if how you're using theory in a particular way, or your methodology, or anything of that sort, work, and they can point out some blind spots, because we all have blind spots. So do use each other as a resource. Do not let
Is it there? I read it, Rozhen read it here.
stop you from doing that. Because the quality of your writing when you start there is so much better having already seen external. Yes.
So if you can tomorrow bring in your abstracts, I'm going to have just bring your abstract. If you can't do that, it's fine, I'll print it.
Learn that.
You can actually go through your abstracts.
I need a network. Who are my people who are
Yeah, tomorrow review. For the ones who want it reviewed, some maybe shy a bit. So we can review your one if you like. Yeah, so we can do that. I'll keep you updated by the WhatsApp group. So I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.
Nevertheless, we have to two referees, and they don't see who you are. The only people who see the identity of the article of the author is the general editor. That's all. So there's no reason to have a fear about sending it to a journal. Absolutely no fear at all.
Without reading group, actually, we don't have a culture of encouraging reading groups as much. But when we established the research center here at Sulaimani Polytechnic University, one of the goals for the research we were actually trying to do research, reading groups as a way recognizing about the limited readings. We have not yet started. I mean, in our group, which is Digital Cultural Heritage Research Group, we are hoping to do that, where we will assign each of the group members an article and then just come and present for the others. It's just that as a way. I have been encouraging my master's students to do that, but I mean, it would be nice if we become more organized across universities, across the same institution, and even more interdisciplinary way, so that people learn from each other.
You may know that in the UK these days we have this rather invidious procedure called the REF, the Research Excellence Framework, which basically means that every single member of staff has their work assessed by an external peer review system. So now in my university, and I'm sure this is the big one of many universities in the UK, and it might be something worthwhile picking out here too, that any piece of work that you want to have published has to go through an internal moderation system. So that means somebody else will read it and make comments. Now, sometimes it's difficult, obviously, because your research is going to be so specialised. But, you know, just to have an alternative view, maybe someone that's not a specialist can also help.
One thing, I really even hate to say this, but it's a reality about research ethics. Because now, one of the issues that sometimes our researchers, they don't want to share their papers or something, they are worried that the person who they are sending to might actually publish it, and take away their name, and then they get published with that. So, sometimes I say...
In my experience, we've never ever...
Oh, I know, I can imagine that involves something, but actually in our case, and me trying to be honest, to put, you know, fingers on the actual issues, actually it happens a lot, more than what we can, you have work, but I mean, that will compromise any attempts to, you know, to actually you send someone to review it, because then you would put you in a risk that someone was like, steal your idea, that's how it's the word that they use. They steal your ideas and then they publish the paper, and now you don't have any record or any evidence to show like that. It was mine, not theirs, so, you know, you end up with something.
There's a possibility that they could be traced, though.
Yeah.
Oh,
because it's digitally written.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can figure out the first version of it when it was written.
No, but I mean, if it's not published.
No,
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. If you write a Word document, I know when you wrote it.
I would still have,
know that
if you
it's
submitted
not
to an article, if you submitted to the journal, I would have evidence that article was submitted to a journal on a certain date.
Yes.
So that's it.
I am looking out before you can send it to a publisher, and then you are risking. This is not me being cynical about this, but I was trying to think about.
Because journals don't want to get caught up in that.
No,
I
of
can
course
say
I
that.
know.
And so, if you, I mean, this is a terrible way to think about it, but if you can evidence that the idea was yours first, just based on when you wrote it, a journal is going to retract that. They are going to not want to be associated with a piece of research that's stolen.
Yes.
Because that ethics falls on them.
So do you know of any cases from anywhere that they might be able to, you know, solve some issues around that or something? And another issue that we have is not, especially in the case of masters and PhD, written in non-English, like, you know, Kurdish or Arabic, they are not, like, you know, they are on papers. Now there is Al Qadisya Polish library. They are trying to do some database for recording all the masters and PhD, just to make sure they are recorded at least. In fact, they even allow for new students, they have students who have not finished, to actually basically like book their title and, you know, write an abstract so that they are saying these ideas were mine so that not someone else will take it. Because in the past there have been cases where people take other people's masters or PhD and they change names. It's very unfortunate, but I mean, we do have some serious issues when it comes to research ethics.
Well, I mean, all I can do is A, raise awareness, but B, I mean, if that's genuinely a concern, then the beauty of the social sciences and humanities is, even if you're not from my field specifically, you should be able to understand what I'm writing. So, okay, if you're worried that someone from your field is going to steal your idea, form an interdisciplinary group. Because they're not going to steal your idea because it's not their field. The likelihood that people would even take them seriously, that they suddenly came up with this idea that isn't part of their own research. And make it an interdisciplinary group that you go to. One of the people I always talk to, because she just writes so well, I mean, it boggles my mind. So I always take my writing initially to her. She's from French history. Has nothing to do with what I do in terms of, you know, transnational higher education and you know, critical race theory. I mean, it's a completely different field, but she's able to, because it's still in that sort of realm of the social sciences and understanding what social sciences do, she can still read and give impact. It's not as, you won't have as detailed feedback as you might from someone in your own field, but if that's a concern, that's one of the candidates.
I have a question. No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Just maybe that's a silly question I asked you because I don't have any experience with the international journals. So, do you have any ethical guidance for when I want to conduct interview with the girls for another paper, for example? You rejected my research because you see that's unethical. Why I conducted my interview?
There's a section on ethics.
When is it tomorrow or the day after?
after, I can't remember which day. It's the end of the day tomorrow. The messiness of ethics, actually, I think is what I called it and everything. So, and part of that, we will be discussing like anonymity, protection, vulnerable groups, things like that, as well as the more broader question of who are you to speak for others, which is a very big, messy question. So yes.
So we didn't cover any other, perhaps we can speak about it now, and again, it's about some of the things we've been speaking about, is how to identify a research partner or writer outside Iraq. And I think that could be one of the, I mean, we spoke about it this morning because obviously Iraq is important and we're in a strategic area, whether it's in heritage, whether it's in other areas. There's a lot of people who are interested in writing with Iraqis because Iraqis obviously are able to collect information and bring those voices that are often neglected and not covered. Iraqi voices are next to zero when it comes to academic publishing because of our publishing standards in this country. So I think one way in which we can sort of jump into a sort of fast-track this process is to work with people who have an interest in Iraq and who sort of meet, because again, it's inaccessible in many ways. People, I mean, even Lloyd had problems getting here to Sulaimani, had to go through to the university, getting access. It's not an issue, it's not an easy thing to get to Iraq. There are certain processes that one has to do. So there are academics outside Iraq who would be very much interested in working with whether media, social affairs, security studies, heritage, women's issues, gender, so many important topics. So what do you suggest in terms of reaching out to those academics outside? How can we do that? How can Iraqi academics do that so that they can work, despite, you know, it's a learning process also to work with them in preparing some of the research that they could publish together. So anything on that would be really important, I think.
And actually, you raised this question before when we were just sort of on Skype.
Yeah.
The group of us planning this session was something we talked about. One of the ideas you had, we were talking about, was creating a network, an online network, where people could register their interest.
As a blog.
Yeah, like a blog. The idea being, okay, who's a member of this? What are the research they're doing? Oh, we can connect this way. And then getting both British, American, whatever scholars who are interested in that work, as well as scholars within Iraq signed up on it. Then it becomes almost like a place where you can meet others that you know are interested in things. So that was one idea. And I think that's a good idea. I mean, it's going to take, you know, somebody maintaining it. But if we can start that, again, get word around. Because, you know, at LSE, we have a Center for Middle Eastern Studies. I know that when they found out I was going to Iraq, they're like, how did you? And I'm going, I was asked. I didn't do anything. Because we met at a conference. We networked, and then that's how this happened, right? And so I think if we can figure out multiple ways of networking, and how to figure out how to reach out to these centers at universities. Because if LSE has a, you know, Center for Middle Eastern Studies, I guarantee you, yeah, every major university is going to have similar centers. So it's about, rather than, okay, so there is you reach out to them, but it's also getting them interested in reaching out and seeing the possibilities coming together.
Would you recommend, for instance, academics just doing, you know, emailing someone that they are following
honestly,
in their field?
Everyone I know from a conference.
So you all have your colleagues and networks of studies, and I imagine you must know someone who works in Europe or in North America. Okay? Given that scenario, what I would suggest you do is contact a colleague and try and negotiate or invent a research policy or agenda, such as the possibility of maybe submitting a special issue to a journal. Just by chance, I might jump in again. There's a special issue of this journal here on Kurdistan in 2018. If you look at the contents and the authors, you may be surprised. So, I have Fakhruddin Sumer, who's from the Department of Business Administration, American University of Iraq, Sulaimani, Iraq. I have Behruz Chaman Ara and Cyrus Amiri, also from Iraq, Kurdistan. We have another guy called Sulaimani Polytechnic. Now, basically, what I'm trying to say, it's all about your own motivation. Create these networks, make these proposals. I can guarantee that Western academics will be interested in what you guys are doing. Okay? Iraq right now, Kurdistan in particular, is hot news. It's a hot potato. Everyone wants a piece of the pie to make the cookbook. Okay? So, don't think that, don't be shy, don't be introspective. People in the West would really, really love these kind of suggestions and proposals about collaboration. In fact, universities in Britain these days are all about collaboration. The idea of the individual scholar in his ivory tower or her ivory tower is gone. It's all about collaboration. So take it seriously and think about the possibilities of maybe, organising something.
So there's legitimate interest.
So here's the proof. The proof is here, honestly.
Can we take a look at the journal, please?
Sure. I'll pass it around so you can all have a look.
I was checking, sorry, when you were talking, I was looking at your journal. Does the journal have impact factor? I was checking the Middle East.
The impact factor for that one will be far greater than the impact factor for this one.
How much is?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, I'm sorry. This one is very, very low. So we have articles published in this one, and they have maybe views, they don't even reach 3 figures. Online views. Whereas the other article, the other journal, it's pretty good.
That's what I hope that one analysis that comes out from your answer is that the impact factor is not.
It's not the be-all and end-all.
But we need it on, that's why I keep emphasizing this. It's becoming such a buzz here. Anything when you say publish, how like impact factor, something like that. And I keep saying this
But if you check any journals online, like from Taylor and Francis, on the cover page, you will have the impact factor. You can find it easily.
At the cover page?
Yeah.
So I recently got a paper published. It's in the process of being published. It's 1 week left for me to make the final edits. But it's got a DOI number. It's going to be published with the International Heritage Studies. And what did I do in this paper? I interviewed 5 people. 5 archaeologists, heritage people, and they were very happy. It was, you've just also published in the same journal.
Yes,
so Rozhen is also published in the same journal, which is an important journal.
Yes.
Journal of International Heritage Studies.
Yes.
Right? So, because Iraqi voices are not expressed there, anywhere in Iraq, because of the language issues or other issues, culture issues. So I interviewed 5 Iraqi archaeologists, heritage people, and they were very happy. Because I gave them, I didn't give them, it's in my name, but I presented to them real knowledge on the ground about what's happening in terms of heritage, conflict, all those issues. So I was able to publish it because they hadn't heard of Iraqi voices in relation to some of the issues I was covering. So I think, again, what we were saying, getting the voices out there are very important. I'm willing to work with people in my field who are here, who are in heritage, archaeology, politics of heritage. I'm willing to work with anyone here on that. I know you're a lawyer and other areas, but I can't work with lawyers, but I can work with heritage people. I know Osama, you're working on that. We can work together because it's important that this is the kind of bridges we're trying to establish. And I can also suggest, in the process, other people who are working in this field, Iraqi, non-Iraqi, would be very interested in Iraqi Kurdistan's heritage, connections, synergies. And so the network that we're trying to create, I don't know where it is, the WhatsApp group, that could be the basis. And of course I'll be emailing you afterwards with more information about some kind of network or blog. And it could be part of our, part of the process of developing our research projects.
That speaks for gap. When it comes to research, they say always find the research gap. We have a lot of gaps, you have to look for the items. There are too many things that have not been touched on research here. So that's why I think it was.
Which is all the more reason why we need your voices to lead it. Because the last thing we want is people who are not from here claiming to speak for you. That's the worst thing that can happen in handling a scam. So take it, take ownership of it. Speak to
So
it.
could you just look at just a couple of sentences on the damage that it creates in terms of representing Iraqi voices? I mean, I know this is something that you work on, I work on this in part. Just the damage that others speaking on behalf of Iraqis out there in Europe, and I spoke about it, the ways in which projects are designed, often international projects are designed outside Iraq. If you could speak about some of those issues.
So I'm in the field of education, so I'm just going to use my field as a prime example. One of the places I've worked and done research is in Kazakhstan. And what happens, what happened in Kazakhstan. So, brief context, because we're social sciences and context matters. Soviet Union dissolved, they became an independent state in '92. And they were left with no real educational infrastructures because the Russians basically pulled out and left no money behind. Very crude simplification. And what basically happened is you have European and North American organizations coming in, doing the research based on standards that they assume are universal, based on the assumption that, well, what happened in Kazakhstan and Kazakh history and the people of Kazakhstan and their ethnic diversity doesn't matter. That as long as you do this, this will be the result. It then created a narrative, like in the World Bank in 2008 wrote a report about Kazakhstan saying that Kazakhs don't think critically in university. I mean, the most damaging report you could make in terms of it basically pathologized an entire nation as having terrible education, as the people having a problem. And in doing that, they took away the complete voices of the people who, in a political context that's only had one president that wins by 92% of vote, criticality, being critical is going to look different. And if you're using Western eyes to determine what critical looks like, you're going to pathologize people into being, right? So that's what happened in education in Kazakhstan. Because the research was conducted by people who assumed they knew better and they didn't need to know the people. So it takes away your voices, and you want to be in control of saying, this is what it means to be Kurdish, what it means to be Iraqi, what it means to do this work here. You don't want anyone else telling you, actually, no, this is what you are. So, but that's mine. Yeah, I sort of get on the pulpit about that. I get a little angry. So please get published. Make sure it's you who speak for academics here, and not, this is going to sound terrible, LSE. London School of Economics should not be speaking to Iraq.
I have a question to like the program. 1.5, please. What is the role of peer review? Who was the very first one who invented that concept of peer review? And when it was applied for the very first time, it was not present in the 40s and 60s, right?
I have no idea when the system was first invented or was used, but I guess an interesting question is, when we think about writing our research, can you think of another system which would be more beneficial than having your peers, anonymous peers, actually reading our work and giving their views? I mean, how can we give our work some kind of, having at least some kind of procedure whereby we can get independent, valid assessments of our work? What is the alternative to peer review?
My question is that when it was applied for the very first time in my book,
I have no idea.
Since the 80s, late 80s?
No. There were journals that were published, for example, in the UK way back in the 19th century. Now, in the 19th century, but I don't know. I don't know whether these articles were peer reviewed or not. I would imagine that they were. So, for example, we have There's a journal in Glasgow University. Glasgow University is an ancient university. It was established in 1452, whatever. The point to make of it is that there was a journal related to theology and religious studies, which was published in the 1950s. I know for a fact that these articles were peer-reviewed then. My hunch, my assumption, is that articles in other journals were peer-reviewed before that.
By whom? External
assessment.
Reviewers or part of the...
No. The articles that were submitted to this journal that I'm talking about in Glasgow University were peer-reviewed by academics who worked within the UK. So there would have been specialists or academics who worked in the field in theology and religious studies in various universities in the United Kingdom.
Commission?
I don't think peer review has. I don't think peer review has ever been paid.
You see, sometimes we do have a process that takes that with peer review, which is. And by the way, in fact, speaking about that, there is an assumption that open access thing. That some people think that when they pay, they're actually paying for. Yes, yes.
It doesn't work.
Yes. My assumption. I need to look at this point of view and what is this for? It's you are paying for that.
The editors have no involvement in open access.
I see.
What happens is that if you want your piece of work to be gold star, which means anyone can access it, all you do is give your money to the publishers. Not to the editor. The editor has nothing to do with it. It's only the publisher. So, I mean, the gold access articles are very, very few and far between because it's about £2,000. Most common is green, and for green it means basically that your work is accessible immediately only to those people who subscribe to the institution or the journal, after which, after 2 years, it's accessible for everyone.
So that's good for, I think, for our scholars to know there's a difference between pay that, like, it's not, you are not paying, you are paying the publisher who would otherwise make money from selling your article as opposed to the editor, because the assumption sometimes was, because if it's paid for the editor, then that means you are, like, the worry is that you are kind of, forging the process or something like that. I mean, it says that.
The interesting thing to say is that there's virtually no contact between the publishers and the editorial board. The only time I've had contact with the publishers is when they say to me things like, do you realise that the article under review for your journal has also been sent to one of our other publishers for assessment? So that's the only time that they intervene. So they're not out to make a quick buck in trying to influence our publishing policy at all.
Is there a difference between open access review process and time and your stuff? But that's another thank you for defining that.
No correlation at all. So once an article is sent to us, to the editors, we don't know whether the author wants it to be gold or green.
Oh, you're right. So
we don't know. So our process is simply to get the article reviewed as soon as we can.
Because I have heard our scholars sometimes complain about the fact that say, oh, if I have money, if I want to publish, then I need to pay this much thousand. And I say, why would you have to pay? If they make a case of that, then that means you cannot publish internationally because then you have to pay 2,000, 3,000. I say, why? You see, because otherwise the other one will take us ages, but this one will take us. That means this is another yet paying me.
No. That's not that. Answer is this: pay for publish for the specific author. That is the law. No. Pay for publish for the specific author. He or she exactly. No. He or she exactly knows that if he submits this or that paper to a genuine journal with a real scientific, robust, peer-reviewing process, it will get immediately rejected.
No, I know.
And that's why they pay for.
So that's why I'm trying to clarify it again, because one of the misunderstandings from our scholars.
That's the speed of that.
Yes.
Impossible you can review a paper within just a few days. Impossible.
No, but that's why I'm saying it's really important to understand, to get from the editor's point of view, that paying, like, there's no difference between when you go for an open access and not in terms of speed time, unless the journal is actually, the genuine journal in that sense. But otherwise, time-wise, it doesn't make a difference saying
You know exactly that this journal is a fake one, just to publish for some reason or another. Pay for publish, and that's why they call it for just good authors. Full stop.
But it's, in humanities and social sciences, it's very rare to find, right? To get the public to pay in social sciences, humanities, I've never thought about it.
No.
Yeah. But in other subjects, it is, we have to pay. Sciences, maybe.
Yeah.
Definitely
not in social sciences.
I think we'll take a few questions around
Sorry. My question is just about criteria of contribution. What do you mean by contribution here? To find the gap and to bridge the gap, or to find the new models by combining many theories, or what do you mean by
Contribution can be in many things. So there are multiple ways to contribute to a field. You can contribute to a field because you found a gap that nobody's researched. You can contribute to a field because you're using theory in a new way. You can contribute to the field because you're using methods in a new way. So there's no one way to contribute to a field. There are multiple ways, and the key is to figure out what way are you contributing to the field. What is it that you're doing that's a contribution?
Also, is there any difference between contribute to the field or to the body of knowledge?
It's the same. It's synonym.